What is up, everyone? Welcome back to Grid Talk Talks the Grid. Today, we will talk all things Indy 500. So get ready for a little 101 when you have no idea what we're talking about, because I certainly am not the most smart person when it comes to this kind of motorsports. But luckily, we have a special guest today. So Aimee, why don't you introduce who we
Yes.
have?
So as you can see, there is a special guest. This is Mike, as you may know him from Indy Fanatics. If you've not already seen their YouTube, hit it up as they are smashing the Indy YouTube live. And Mike, do you want to say anything more about yourself?
I mean, you've just given everything. We're smashing the Indy YouTube live now. We talk F1, we talk IndyCar. It's usually me and Stephen. Stephen's away on a holiday somewhere, so I'm left to hold the fort and come and have this lovely chat about IndyCar and spread the IndyCar love. That's what I'm here to do. That's what I think I've been brought here to do anyway.
That sounds awesome. So all of us have prepared a few questions, as probably many people don't really are as deep into IndyCar as into F1, for example. And maybe I can take it away right with my first question, which kind of touches onto that. Because I was wondering, you have this phenomenon with like soccer, which is a very European thing, and then you have football, which is a super American thing. Do you agree that we have the same thing with like IndyCar and Formula One, where Formula One is traveling all over the world? They have a huge fan base everywhere. And then we have IndyCar and all these IndyCar series that, to me, it seems like they are very popular more on the American side of the world. Is that something you would agree with? And if yes, what do you think has to change for IndyCar to become even more popular than it is already?
Definitely agree with that. Yeah, obviously F1, it's had its 70-year of history. Well, actually IndyCar, its most famous race, the Indy 500, this year will be the 105th running of the race, and its first race was in 1911. So technically, in its formation in some sort of American Open World Championship, it's been going for longer than F1 technically. But yeah, it's very based in the States. There's kind of been some complications. So, like when bad breakups happen in a kind of relationship and everything kind of throws pots out of the pan. So IndyCar had one split at the end of the 1970s where that went, but they were okay. Kart was kind of competing with F1. And in the 80s and 90s, there were some stars from Formula One going across to IndyCar. And, IndyCar was growing in popularity. Everything was going on there. And then they had a second split, and that just basically everything went tits up. NASCAR controlled American motorsport, and still to this day is like the most popular sport in America in terms of motorsport. IndyCar is obviously second, and F1 is growing. And well, obviously we know F1 with the Miami Grand Prix is looking to expand its fan base in America as well. For IndyCar to promote, they just need to get it in front of people's eyes. I know Charley as well is a fan of Formula E. I think all you girls watch Formula E as well, and they've been fantastic of getting their marketing and promoting the series, because they know their racing product probably consistently is better than Formula One. There's probably more action in a Formula E race consistently than F1. So IndyCar is a bit more like Formula E, I would say. The grids, the cars are more kind of stock, they're closer, the teams, the gaps aren't too far to win. We've had 5 different winners in 5 races this far this season. So the racing's brilliant. They just need to put it in front of people's eyes. And whether that's racing in Europe or just promoting it better, I think, across Europe, because I think a lot of people don't know exists, if that makes sense. I think a lot of people would kind of go, IndyCar, what's that? And they'll vote in maybe polls on Twitter, F2 or Formula E are better, because they don't really know much about it. And I think a lot of it is just they don't know. So marketing probably on a global scale, but probably bringing races to Europe would help. And they used to do that, but it's been a bit hard to take off the ground. They've always had a really strong core in America and struggled outside of that.
It's a shame because I got into IndyCar last year, so and I love it. It's probably if I had to choose between IndyCar and Formula E, I probably couldn't. Like, I love them both equally. F1 is still up there just slightly, but I think it's just, everyone says it's just the pinnacle of motorsport, isn't it? Like, I think that will never change. But I love it. I wish more people gave it a go. I've never watched NASCAR, but I've watched little bits of it, but from the face of it, like, I definitely prefer Indy. And I wonder if that's more a Europe thing.
I think we love single seaters, don't we? So I think if you're an F1 fan, there's just something about single seaters that kind of exposed cockpit feels. It kind of feels exciting. I don't know if there's because they're exposed, they're not. It kind of feels more of a distant world, maybe. Like, I can't just go down and buy one of those where someone's probably got their Ford Focus and slaps down like some country roads and thinks they're British touring cars driver or something like that. You can get away with that. So I guess that's probably the allure of it. But yeah, NASCAR has some crazy stuff I don't really understand. It's kind of like a tier system. So don't worry, Charlie, it is confusing, NASCAR, I think.
Aimee, do you have a question?
I do. So because I've seen the Indy 500 once, and I'm going to try this year, but what is the difference between an IndyCar race and the Indy 500?
Okay. So this is the big one. So the Indy 500 is basically, I would say, is the biggest single motorsport race in the world as it stands. Like the Le Mans used to be of the 24 hours, but I would say the Indy 500 now, the way the world goes, I don't think people can really commit to watching 24 hours. I know it's still at the weekends, but I think it doesn't necessarily appeal as much. But yeah, the Indy 500 is bigger than even any single event in Formula One. Like I said, this is the 105th running. It's been such a long-standing event. The main one is it's an oval. So you've got these guys going around now at speeds of, I think in the race, they'll be around about 220, 225 mile an hour for 248-ish laps, I think it is, around about that time. So the level of concentration is that, but it's mainly just the history. It's just such a big event. Like, they have the Borg Warner Trophy. So if you win the Indy 500, you could basically have a terrible season. But if you won the Indy 500, you could almost be seen as having a better season than the guy who won the championship. It's one of those things because there's so much history of it. There's so many years of people. It's only been won by 4 times by a driver, 3 times with AJ Foyt, Rick Mears, and Al Unser. And there's just something special about it. It's the single largest motorsport venue in the world. I think non-COVID times, there's like 400,000 people who can attend the race, which is like mental. Like F1 get excited when Silverstone has crowds of 150,000. That's more than double that at Indy 500, and they'll easily feel that. Like, it's just such an event, and there's qualifying is almost an event in itself. Like the Indy 500 qualifying is this weekend, so they have only 33 cars can enter the race, and if there's more people who want to enter that, then anyone basically from 30 downwards has to go on to the Sunday, and they have the risk of having a separate day. They get one chance to do 4 laps, and basically the lowest average scores will get booted and what's bumped day. And also they'll have a pole day as well, where the top 9 from the Saturday go through. And then you just have the race itself, and it's just a mega event. And the season itself is good. It goes over the course of the championship, but I think it's because the Indy 500 almost, if we're going back to the 1930s, there were maybe 4 races in a season. Basically the season was Indy 500. If you won the Indy 500, you won the season, basically. So I think the Americans are very proud of it, very proud of how it's gone through the war and built into this major sporting event, and it's just huge. It's an event like no other in motorsport, I think. I hope that explains it, kind of.
Obviously, I'm a McLaren fan, so I'm obviously going to be backing As I do, as always. Is there anybody that's like you've got your eye on that you're backing for the Indy 500 rather than the championship?
I'm terrible at this because I like everyone. So I kind of go, who do I like him a bit. Yeah, no, I also like him. If he won, yeah, I'd quite like that. I don't know, anyone who'd be in particular. I'd quite like Jack Harvey, the British driver, if he did well. He's had a bit of he's been very quick this season, but not had the best of luck. I think it would be fantastic for his team because over the last 5 years, they've kind of gradually grown, entering more races in a season. So it's not like F1 where you enter the season and you're there for the 22 races, 23 races, however many Liberty Media want to shove in a season on that basis. But you could, so they started entering, I think, like just the Indy 500, then they'd enter like 6 races a season. And then last year was their first full time, and this is their second full time. So I'd love to see Jack Harvey do well, but I know you'd be a Pato or a Felix or even Montoya to win it. Montoya would be quite cool to win it, actually. Reuniting with McLaren since 2006, isn't it? He was with them in F1.
Yeah.
I think something that might be interesting to know for people is what's the challenge? Because we as Formula One fans, we often hear, oh, they're just driving cars in circles. Not sport. That's not interesting. And I mean, I have a hard time explaining it to people when it comes to like Formula One, but how do you explain the challenge that the drivers have to face? Because it is extremely fast, it's extremely long, a huge level of concentration, I think. So what's like the biggest challenge you think the drivers have to face on track?
Good question. I think there's a video actually of Alexander Rossi, and he explained this quite well. And Indianapolis in particular, it's kind of very technical circuit, and each corner is very different in its own right. So obviously I mentioned you're going at 220 odd mile an hour average. Like F1 on the straights are probably getting to about 200, 205 mile an hour. So they're now going consistently faster the entire race than what an F1 car would be doing on the fastest bits of, say, Monza. I think Monza might be the quickest. They might get up to, say, 210, 214. I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, IndyCar technically around the ovals will be faster. So any slight mistake, you're in a wall, basically, out of the corner, and it's so easy to lose it. So it's almost like a street circuit in some sort of ways where, you know, obviously we've got Monaco this weekend. I don't know when this is coming out, might have been the last weekend or whatever when it comes out. So obviously that's quite easy to see because, you know, the walls are all very tight, and you think the ovals have got these big wide stretches of tarmac. You're like, well, you know, they're hardly going to crash. How hard can it be? But the cars are so finely balanced. And Rossi said that the tyres go through different levels in it. So, you know, you always talk about in F1, you've got the tyre temperatures and they've got to operate in their windows. And if they go out the windows, whatever, it gets complicated. The tyre nerds get really excited about that type of thing. But basically, they'll go they're easier to go into turn one. And then they're really hot because they've had a lot of pressure on them going out of that one, which then there's this kind of short straight between turn one and turn two, which then makes it harder. And they've got a weight jacker that they're trying to do when going around. So basically they're changing the balance of the car while going the laps. The tyres are constantly on edge. Anything that kind of loses it, they can end up in a wall. And they've got to do that for 240 odd laps. So I guess that's the challenge of it. It's just mental. And also by the speeds they go at, it is probably the most dangerous form of motorsport that you can do.
Yeah, I think that makes absolute sense, especially if like the slightest mistakes they just push you right out and there is nowhere to go. There are also so many cars on track. It's just like mental. Interesting.
So what happened in last year's IndyCar in the 500? Give us a recap if you can remember.
Yeah, no, last year's recap. So Marco Andretti. Andretti's one of the famous names. For F1 fans, they'll know that he was the 1978 Formula One world champion. But he's kind of a bit of a legend in IndyCar, and he won it in 1969. But his son then competed in it. And now Marco is the third generation Andretti. But Andretti's have kind of a curse because they've had obviously these three Andretti's compete in it, and no one's won since 1969 when Mario won that first one, even though they've all had talent and chances. And Marco actually, in his first race in 2006, almost won it. He had one of the closest finishes in Indy 500 history where they kind of went on the line. And yeah, it was so close. I mean, it was like 0.2 seconds to finish. It was like mental, like how close it was. It might have been even closer than that. I don't know. But anyway, he was on pole. I've given a lot about Marco Andretti, but basically he got overtaken going into the first corner by Scott Dixon, and that was his race. But Scott Dixon, who won the championship in the end, had the fastest car, won the first 4 races of the season. I think this was about 6 or 7 in the season, but he was looking really quick, dominating the race. But later on in the race, because in IndyCar, cautions always bring things closer together, so you can be almost like a lap down. But if you stay on the lead lap, you can be last and somehow cycle yourself to the front if the pit stops work out, because it's such a short lap. Yeah, it kind of works out. If you time your pit stop at the right time, you can suddenly find yourself from 20th to now 2nd and then a chance of winning the race. But Honda had the power advantage, and Takuma Sato was then, and Scott Dixon in the last part of the race shot off into the distance. Sato took the one. Scott Dixon was like, it's okay, Sato's going to run out of fuel. And then I think it was Simon Pigott crashed at the end, and it actually ended under caution in last year's 500. So not the best of finish. We were exciting, looking forward to it. It was all setting up for a kind of big climatic finish, and was a bit of an anti-climax with the yellow flags. But that made Takuma Sato a 2-time Indy 500 winner, and he's also Fernando Alonso's biggest fan, because every time Fernando Alonso competes in the Indy 500, Takuma Sato wins. So happy days on that. Takuma Sato's got his Spanish flag up in his room. You know, he's a big fan of Spain. He's actually gutted that Renault didn't allow him to compete this year, because it might make it more difficult for him.
Right. The story of the milk.
Okay.
Everyone.
The story
that
of the
everyone
milk.
wants to know.
Okay, so I believe so the first 3-time champion was Louis Meyer back in 1936, I believe. And basically, it was a really hot race. His mum, told him, he's always got to stay hydrated and stuff like that. And he just wanted some milk at the end of the race. So he won the race and got some buttermilk and, drank it. And everyone was like, oh, wow, that's cool. And so they've just decided to turn that into a tradition. And I think there was a short gap after the war between 1946 and 50, whatever, one maybe, that they didn't do it. I can't remember off the top of my head. But then it came back. And it's just this tradition things. And the driver gets to choose what type of milk they are now. I think if they're lactose intolerant, they can have like a different type of milk.
So I said.
Milk, dairy milk, whatever. It's actually an option that the drivers have to fill out on a form, I think, before the race. But it's just this classic picture. It's Indy 500 is all about tradition. And, they like kind of keeping these things from the past, these little notes. So the milk is just something that stayed. But Emerson Fittipaldi, actually, he went over, had a successful IndyCar career or kart career after his Formula One days. And when he won his second race, he said that he was lactose intolerant. He couldn't drink milk, but he drank the first time all right. But really, he was just promoting his orange orchard or whatever it was where he made orange juice. And so he drank orange juice on it. And still to this day, I think a lot of IndyCar fans don't forgive him for it. He got booed for quite a while afterwards because, he kind of almost spat in the face of tradition and used it as a chance to promote his orange juice. It was very weird having to pour orange juice over himself. So make the milk weird thing weirder. He chose orange juice. But that basically was it. It was a guy listening to his mum, making sure that he stayed hydrated after the race, and guys have gone, you know what, I want some milk when I finish the race. So it's stuck ever since.
I quite like that. I quite like that little tradition. It's nice.
I mean, back in the day when Lando still was obsessed with milk, he would have loved to compete in IndyCar, because he would have just like
Absolutely
right.
I'm convinced that he will end up in IndyCar, race the Indy 500 at some point, because he did it in the virtual one last year, didn't he?
Yes, I saw that. I mean, that's like my initial experience with IndyCar races is virtual because of sim racing that I'm very invested in, I would say. So I watched quite a bit of that, and there were some scandalous things going on there last year. We're not going to go into that, but it sure got a bit of attention, and I think it might even have given the whole thing a bit more attention. So let's see what happens in the future. Who knows?
Talking of F1 drivers in IndyCar, is Romain Grosjean going to be in this year's Indy 500?
No. So he may be in the future, but basically there are two guys who are like, IndyCar is one of the most experienced rookie fields in history ever this year, where Scott McLaughlin's gone over. He was a 3 times supercar winner. Romain Grosjean, obviously 10 years in F1, 10 podiums in F1, everything on that. And Jimmy Johnson from NASCAR, who was a 7-time Cup champion, also went over. The older guys, and Jimmy, who's 45, and Romain, who's 34, basically were like, you know, we've got families to think of. Driving around at 220 miles an hour and something that I've never done before is maybe a little bit dangerous to do without any sort of practice. A few people, Jimmy Johnson, were kind of like, well, that's what you've done in NASCAR, but he's never driven single seaters in his life before, and it's a very different thing, and how you drive the car and how you take the corners and braking is very different as well. So Roman won't be in it this year, but he's loving IndyCar. I think he was interviewed at the end of his pole position, and they said, what's your plans for IndyCar in the future? And he said, I'm looking for a house in the States. So I think that's pretty much saying I'm here to stay. But he plans to have a practice. He might even drive Gateway, which will be the last oval in this IndyCar season. But yeah, he won't be in it this year.
And no, on Grosjean, he has literally took to IndyCar like a duck to water. Like it was made for him. I don't know why he was like, obviously, like, thankful that he was in F1 because everything happens for a reason. But I don't know why, like, he could have just jumped straight into IndyCar and had like an incredible career. Like it, amazing. Is there anything if someone's not watched Indy 500 before, is there anything that you feel like they should know before watching it?
Have a break before it starts?
Yes.
That.
Yeah, know
Get your
that.
snacks ready.
Until the last round of pit stops, do not try and understand where anyone is in the racing order, because you'll suddenly see some guy who's leading, but then the pit strategy is then there, and then a caution will come out, and someone who was 20th will cycle forward to 10th, and like the order will be jumping there. And just in a normal race it's chaos trying to figure it out. Like, you know, sometimes in F1 it kind of happens in closer races, but a lot of the times Max and Lewis are so far out ahead that even when they pit stop, they're still cycled at the front, because the field is a lot closer. Especially on ovals, you don't get too much of a gap. And the laps are so short, it kind of gets all jumbled up and mixed up, and trying to go there. So do not try and understand. Just try and watch the overtakes, enjoy the overtakes, and try and understand, watch pit stops and see who's got a quick one, who's coming out and pitting at the same time in that front, and try and remember who they were racing with on track and whether they're now in front of that car or behind it. It gets complicated on that one. Get a spotter's guide, because one confusing thing in IndyCar is even if you follow IndyCar, most of them have special liveries for the Indy 500 only. And you're going to be going, who the hell is that in that car? I have no idea, because they're going for that. The only one I think probably traditional is Scott Dixon has pretty much got the same livery, which is this blue and orange car. So that's pretty easy to stand out. But the rest of them, someone will link it on Twitter, someone will show it on Instagram or whatever. Get that in front of you if you're kind of new to it, and that might help you kind of understanding, where they are, certainly on that front. So definitely that, and just expect chaos is probably the best one to go. There will be a caution at some point, there will be a crash, and as much as anyone will tell you they're favourites to win the race, it could literally be anyone going into it.
I saw that there is a team in Indy 500 which is very, very female dominated, and of course that is something that I personally love to see, but do we think that is something that will happen more often in the future, or is it something that we should expect to be an exception for now? Because there are still people who are like, oh, that's so surprising. I personally think it's not surprising. It's great people doing great work. So is that something that has had an impact on changes maybe throughout the whole sport and the situation?
IndyCar has always been quite committed, and I think probably in the last 10, 15 years, bar last year, they've pretty much had a female running in the Indy 500 every year. They've, in terms of females in motorsport, IndyCar is streaks ahead of Formula One. It's very consistent, and when IndyCar says it's going to go for equality and diversity and change, they do kind of generally get actions rather than just words type of thing. So the team you're talking about is Paretta Autosport. Yeah, the driver is Simona De Silvestro. She's a Porsche, I think, test driver in a normal job, but she has driven in IndyCar. It's been 5 years since she last entered with Andretti in 2015. But she's experienced, she's a quick driver as well, but the team's kind of backing comes from Team Penske. So this will probably be the best machinery that she's ever done. So it's not a Penske car, but they very much helped this team set up. And I think it's through Beth approaching Roger Penske, this has all come about. So definitely something you'll expect in the future. And I think Simona's already spoken about, if it works with Porsche commitments, hopefully running more races in IndyCar, and definitely looking at this as an Indy 500 entry. And for those female drivers coming up in the W Series and other series as well, it's definitely going to be a team. And, there are teams within IndyCar on merit. If they will show there, they'll definitely give an opportunity to it. So, yeah, if you're a female looking for kind of, female driver role models at the highest level, IndyCar is a pretty good place to look, especially the Indy 500.
That's amazing. I think that's incredible compared to so many other parts of motorsport where we're still struggling to really find equality in any kind of way. So that is awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think this was not only interesting, but also very fun. And I think it might help some people to understand how big of a challenge it is to drive in an oval for more than 200 laps. That's insane, like really. So you guys out there, make sure to check out their Twitter and their YouTube, Indy Fanatics. Very, very great content. Definitely go and give them a like and a follow. Also, don't forget to check out our social media, which is also linked in the description below. Make sure to follow us on our blog to get all kinds of content all the time, different series, different knowledge, everything really cool. Make sure to go on our Discord so you don't miss anything and you have a chance to connect to the whole community. And as always, we hope to see you again next week for another episode of Grid Talk Talks the Grid. And until then, have a great time, stay healthy, stay hydrated, and we'll see you next week. Bye.